Ken Isaacs, Vice President of Programs and Government Relations here at Samaritans Purse. You all in the room know him well. He has been affiliated with Samaritans Purse for 25 years now, and one of the things I really want to do with this International Health Forum is we have a wealth of knowledge from people that over the years have encountered various disasters and medical outreaches, and I really want to capture that with this recording and this opportunity. So today we have the honor of having Ken present to us the medical history over the last 25 years, just everything that he has seen and what we've encountered over the years and how it's evolved and perhaps where we're going. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lance. So anyway, I started with Samaritans Purse in 1988, and at that time it only had about 23 employees, and the mission of the organization was meeting emergency needs of Christian leaders and missionaries. So it was essentially Franklin and one or two other people going around the world interacting with missionaries, national church leaders, missionary hospitals, and seeing a need and essentially writing a check, giving the money, funding it. And so when I went to Ethiopia, I went there as a well driller, which has absolutely nothing to do with medical work. So I can't talk to you technically about medical things, but I can talk to you about structural things and history of how we've got where we are now. And while I was living in Ethiopia, one of the things that I heard said around inside of the organization was that you would never see our name on a truck door because the local partner could do it better. And that sounds nice, that sounds good, but what I witnessed in Ethiopia was I wanted to drill more wells, the local church didn't. We had an opportunity, we lost that opportunity. So I saw that there was a tension there. And then after that, I left Ethiopia in 91. I went to Afghanistan. We were looking as an organization to get involved in things in the world. And but we had not started to operate as an NGO. We had never operated out in the world with our name on a door or a flag. And then in November of 1993, my job. Yes. The famine in Somalia became international news, and U.S. soldiers were sent there. Also, the UN was sent there. And it was really to respond to a famine. So what we did was we met in the Bob Pierce room. Franklin called a meeting, and there were about 15 of us that came there. And our game plan was, let's get a bunch of doctors and go to Mogadishu. That was our game plan. So we got a bunch of docs through World Medical Mission. And Dr. Bransford here was one of them that came over. He didn't come through World Med, but I think you were at Tinwick or at Kajabi at the time. And it was an interesting time to be there. You know, it was what you could call a safe disaster. For a while, there was a period of safety there. So a lot of the NGOs came in. But what we learned was that we needed to have a more thoughtful plan, and that just because there's an emergency doesn't necessarily mean that you need to send a bunch of doctors there. We learned really a lot of things, but we formulated ourselves as Samaritans Purse International Relief. That's when we coined that name, International Relief, and put it under Samaritans Purse, so that when we showed up at a meeting like this, we didn't have to say who we are and what we do. That name sort of explained it. We stayed there from November of 92 to August of 93, and we left shortly after the incident that was made famous with the Black Hawk Down circumstance. And at that point in time, security was gone, and it wasn't safe to stay there. In our program, our medical program, and Dick could speak to this more offline, we won't get him involved right now unless he wants to, was essentially we had different colored pills, bags, antibiotics, wide spectrum kind of stuff, sort of general medicines, and we would have outpatient clinics and sort of mobile outpatient clinics. And there was great need there, but I would say that in hindsight, we weren't as accurately targeted in meeting the needs as we could have been. You think that's a fair assessment?
We tried to open a hospital, and I never could get there.
We weren't able to get there, yeah. So I won't go into that subject now. And so now here you'll see a photograph. Who is it, man? Do you know that man?
Bill Becknell, he's in Russia, been there 20 years.
Yeah, Dr. Bill Becknell, that's in Somalia.
My roommate.
Huh?
He was my roommate.
Was he really? Oh, we're there in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And oddly enough, just to give you a little bit more background, the guy that was running that project was Jim Harrelson, who's now the head of OCC. We hired Jim Harrelson to come out and run that project. So we couldn't find anything else to do with Jim after Mogadishu, so we But it's amazing how God brought him in and brought all of us really into the organization, and then has flourished us in the areas that he led us to. And Jim is certainly one of those examples. The next location I can talk about that is sort of in the process of us developing as an organization, and this presentation today is not like an exhaustive start to finish. These are all of the things. These are more of the touchstones of the caps. Next slide, please. In South Sudan, we started working. We poked around there a little bit in January of '93, but in February of '93, as I recall, we put a team in a place called Ulang. And the picture of South Sudan was an undeveloped, poverty-stricken country that had been at civil war with Sudan since 1983. And it was sort of a vast area the size of Texas. Very few people went in there, and it was all mystery. Nobody knew what was really going on in there, except the refugees that would come out were in horrible conditions. That sort of sets the stage for it. So in February, that's Dr. Paul Jones, and that's actually taken in Ulang. Let's see the next photo there. In Ulang, in February of '93, we opened a project there, and in our mind, it was a medical emergency. Another way of looking at it was a group of people who were living in an environment that was very typical and normal for them. And they had a disease that was spreading in the area called relapsing fever, and it was spread by the bite of lice. This became known to us through a missionary who was living in Nairobi, and we decided to go up and have a response. And we also happened to have the team from some of the team members from Mogadishu, and so we had some capacity now to do another thing. So in Ulang, it was going pretty good. We had outpatient medical clinics, and then we got caught in the middle of something that surprised us. There was a cattle raid. Something simple as a cattle raid, and guys, about 300 or 400 guys with guns, were charging the village of Ulang, and they killed 7 people. And our staff fled and jumped in a hole and took cover there, and they stayed there, and we had to get the UN to come and evacuate us. The UN didn't like us because we were Christians, and we had Bibles with us. You know, they didn't like us, but they came and got our people out. And that, what happened in Ulang was the beginning of the motivation for our aviation program today, that we needed to be able to control our own assets to move our people around. So anyway, it was a good program. If you've ever been up in the main administration building, as you go into the foyer, on the right, you'll see a picture of a black Sudanese boy holding a perfectly white lamb. And that photograph was taken in Ulang. Later, after Ulang, we tried to, at the invitation of a guy by the name of Dr. Timothy, a southern Sudanese doctor, we went to a place called Old Fengai. And we're just doing general outpatient clinical things here. On the 6th or 7th day, was a cattle raid, and they stole everything we had, and we were totally out of business. Our people were held hostage for 24 hours, and we were able to get them out. But we learned a lot through those two things in South Sudan and in Mogadishu, and that is the importance of political analysis of what's going on the ground, who the players are, what the issues are, the importance of logistics. Very essential kind of things, but looking backwards, I can see that God was revealing things to us and keeping us safe in our ignorance at the same time. Keenan, come on over and join us if you want to sit closer. Let's go to Rwanda, April of 1994. So we had essentially been ran out of Ulang and Old Fangai. And we've got 3 or 4 staff hanging out in Nairobi. And we're sort of wondering as an organization, what are we going to do? We had a little apartment rented there, had a little office there. And there was a fellow there that was working for a missionary. The missionary's name was Larry Kitchell. And it was this guy sitting over in the corner by himself in a little desk, and he was writing, and his name was Scott Hewitt. And we hired Scott to come and do our logistics, and those of you who have been around will know that Scott is now at Mafrock, but he was our Kenya country director for many years and has been involved in many aspects of the ministry. But that's how we met Scott Hewitt. April the 6th, 1994, the news erupts, the genocide, Rwanda. I think Time magazine had some kind of title like "The Demons of Hell Are Out" or something like that. So we wanted to be involved. We had no experience in Rwanda. And we sent an assessment team over, and at that time, the activity wasn't actually centered in Rwanda. It was down in a place called Banaka in Tanzania. And that is where all the images came out, where there were about 250,000, soon to be 500,000 refugees living in a field. And these people had run from Rwanda. So we sent a team down there, and the entire work area was controlled by the United Nations High Commission for Refugee. So they had taken the sectors of response, you know, water, food, nutrition, medical, whatever, and they had divided it among 6 NGOs. And they weren't letting anybody else into the camp, period. And they had teeth to enforce that because they had the Tanzanian military there. And if UNHCR didn't give you permission, you couldn't come into camp. And we wanted to do something, we didn't know what to do. And we were so desperate, we were on the verge of entering into a partnership with World Vision on an outpatient clinic 10 miles from Banaka. Okay? But what we learned was when things happen in the world, people give money. And as an organization, as you become more credible and more known, people don't ask you what you're going to do. There's the assumption you're going to do. And you got to sort of figure out. And there's always this discussion of, well, things shouldn't be donor-driven. But there is a counter-argument to be made that I know when my wife and I give money, we pray about it. And if we feel moved to support something, we give money to that. So I think it can't be easily dismissed that, well, we're not, you know, we don't have to pay attention to the donors. No, you do need to pay attention to the donors. It's important. Just little lessons we're learning along the way. So we're in Rwanda, or in Tanzania, trying to get into the camp. Huge need, huge need. And there was a bridge in a place called Rusumo Falls. And I walked across that bridge, and I saw some Rwandan troops on the other side. And I spoke to them in my schoolboy French, and I wrote a letter in English, sitting there with them, and introduced Samaritans First to them, and dropped Billy Graham's name. I think that's the only time I've ever done that. I wrote Billy Graham's name, and told them that we were prepared to provide general medical care to 10,000 people for 90 days. Now, how did I come up with that number? Remember, I'm a well driller. The reason I came up with the number was I had read a brochure about what is now called an emergency health kit. They're used all over the world. An emergency health kit, it's advertised that it can provide general medical supplies for 10,000 people for 90 days. And I knew if I had that kit and could get me some doctors, we could dance. So I wrote that in the letter. And the guy said, come back in 2 days. So in 2 days, I went back, saw the guy. He told me to go to Melindy. I said, we'll go there. He said, the doctor, I think his name was Emil, is waiting for you there. He'll meet you there Monday at 8 o'clock. And I said, okay. Well, the only Melindy I knew was down on the coast of Kenya. So I had to go get a detailed map, and I found this little mud hut village in the northern part of Rwanda. So Jim Harrelson and I took off. We flew to Kampala. We rented a car. We drove down to the border, and we hired a guy to take us across the border. And it was an absolute death zone, absolute death. Not a sound. Not even the animals were making sounds. I've never seen anything like it. And at Resumu Falls, I neglected to tell you this little bit, but there were thousands of bodies coming down the river. And, you know, I just by timing and counting the bodies falling through the weirs of the waterfall, just like, you know, 25,000 people a day were coming down the river. And so it was a horrific situation. And we went and we met Dr. Emil and a woman by the name of Christine, and she showed us a place called Rutari. And Rutari at that time had we estimated about 10,000 people in it. And we said, you know, we can help here. And she said, we want you to help here. She's very nice. The Rwandans are very reserved, very quiet people. And so we came back and we got the team together. This was like our first, in retrospect, like our first DART. All right. So basically it was this. Get the 3 emergency health kits, get all the doctors and the nurses you can find, get them to Wilson Airport. We're going to take off Sunday morning and out of Mbarara and then truck the stuff down, and we've got to be there Monday morning at 8 o'clock or whatever day it was, 8 o'clock. And, you know, God blessed us. AMAIR stepped in. We got MAF involved. We didn't have any aircraft. And we put all that stuff together. Franklin was actually flying back from Moscow, and he knew what was going on, and he came down to Nairobi and flew over with. So here, boom, we land, and we're in Rwanda, like 20 foreigners with the medicine and the docs, 8 o'clock, the appointed day. Goodwill goes a long way, and it did with us. Little did we know that over the next 3 weeks, the Rutari camp would grow to a population of about 125,000 people. So not only were we giving outpatient medical care, but we were also delivering babies, and we got into water tankering business and sort of just generally helping in the camp. When the conflict ended in July and mid-July, we were sort of perched up in the mountains, and we could hear the mortar shells down in Kigali. It was around the middle of July. We drove down there, and we engaged. Actually, we went to the Central Hospital of Kigali. Let's see the next picture there. And this is it when we got there. I don't know how well you can see that picture, but all the people that were in there were murdered, and that's blood all over the floor. And we could find you other gross pictures, but so all the doctors and the nurses had either fled out to Tanzania because they were Hutus, and the Hutus were the ones that had done the killing, or if they stayed, they were killed by the Hutus or the Interahamwe, which is sort of their political group. And let's see the next photograph. We had those smocks made with Samaritan's purse on it. The next one. And this is right below the hospital. We dug up. So as people came, you know, when we came to Kigali, the town was void of people. There's just like maybe a couple hundred people there. You could hear landmines going off. There was still some fighting going on. And there are a lot of, you know, funny and amusing and interesting and stories about how we got living quarters and how we raided warehouses, because the whole city was being looted. And I thought, well, if looting's going to happen, we'll loot for Jesus. So, so we did. We got generators, and Edward Bencham's wife, Dr. Bransford's daughter Bethany, was there with us, and she has quite a like a diary of information. But this photograph that you're looking at right now was down in below the hospital, and as people came back into the city, this was in probably August, September, there was blockages in the sewer pipes, and they dug it up and they found about 6,000 or 8,000 people buried right there in the hospital grounds. So the reason I had this photograph added is because we learned the lesson of emotional trauma and emotional shock. It's not what you expect when you go out to respond to a crisis. You don't always get what you expect. You rarely do. Next, please. As Yugoslavia broke up in 1992, it started dissolving into its people groups of Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia, and Kosovo. So we went there, and the first time I was there, I think, was in August of '92, and we were doing a lot of relief activities there. We were, furnishing food, and we were trucking things, and all that kind of stuff. The most outstanding medical thing that we did was in November of '93. I thought it would sort of be a good idea to take a surgical team in and do something. I didn't know what. I'm not a doc. I'm a well driller. And Franklin said, well, why don't you call Mel Cheatham? He's a neurosurgeon. So I called Mel. Mel said, sure, I'll go. And let me get an anesthesiologist. I'm just thinking like a doc with a bag. Now, he's like, it's the whole team. It's like 12 people or something, because they're going to do like brain surgery. And so we actually went into Sarajevo on United Nations airplane under live fire, riding around in armored personnel carriers, being shot at, stuff going boom. And we got up to this place where we had sent an advance team, and there was an enclave that was relatively safe called Zenica. And in Zenica, there was a large state hospital, about a 400-bed facility, and Dr. Cheatham was there for 10 days, and he performed a number of neurosurgical procedures. One case that stands out in my mind was I would be at Zenica in the morning, and I would go to Novi Bila. The British would take me across the line, the peacekeepers, in a soft-skin vehicle. And I mean, there was like artillery fire. It was a real war zone. And there was a Catholic hospital in Novi Bila that had been turned into, I said a Catholic hospital, it was a Catholic church that had been turned into a hospital. And they had put sandbags up all around the walls and heavy timbers to keep shrapnel, and it was loaded. Hundreds of people were in it. And most of the injuries were, shrapnel and a lot of lost limbs and things. But I saw a guy that had a bullet sort of deflect across the top of his head, and his skull was blown down into the brain. And he was sort of quasi-conscious, and they had this thing wrapped up like some kind of Wyatt Earp movie. And I talked to Dr. Cheatham that night, and he agreed to come over. He came over and he looked, and they set up to do a neurosurgical procedure in the basement of a garage. And it amazed me to be in there and watch that, because there were probably 15 people in the room. He brought the whole surgical team over, and they actually were getting more than they had bargained for when they made the trip to come across the lines into like the center of the war zone thing, But they were all brave and they were champs. And so this guy survived, and he's living today. He's got a normal life because of that. We continued working in Bosnia until 1999. We have some photographs here. That is Dr. Cheatham on the right, and that man in the middle, just as a point of mention, is Josip Juricic, and he is now, the last I heard, the mayor of Sarajevo. He is also a neurosurgeon. And in that photograph, he had lost about 45 kilos. He's a big guy. But that shows you what happens in war. Next photo is this little girl. She's lost her left hand. That was taken off by shrapnel, and that was in Novi Bila. And next photo is very typical terrain of Sarajevo. That's what it looked like going through it back then. So in 1996, we were working in Bosnia, And our country director showed up in America, and he had a kid with him, like a 6-month-old kid or something, you know. And he said, this kid's got a hole in his heart, and he can't get any surgery in Bosnia, and we need to get him to a doctor and get his heart fixed. I think it's called an ASD or a VSD was what he had. And so that child had surgery and survived, and Bill took him back, and then he brought more. And so he started developing this in Bosnia, and we needed to develop here what we were going to do and how we were going to do that, how we were going to make connections with hospitals to donate the surgery, the need for host families. And we brought structure around it, and after about 2 years, we named that, instead of the Bosnia Heart Project, which we put in a newsletter a few times, we called it the Children's Heart Project. And how many children have been treated today through the Children's Heart Project? Over 950 today have had their situations remedied through that program. So this is like a side piece, like Jim Harrelson coming down. You don't know what you're going to find along the way. Let's see the next photo. I think this is the first little boy right here, taken some years later. Do you know that, Cindy?
I don't know.
Okay, well, this is a demonstrative little illustration here of a child who could have had a surgery. In 1997,
It was a child. Yeah, it was a child.
it was a child from Bosnia that heart surgery. In 1997, a missionary from South Africa contacted us and asked us to go look at South Sudan. Well, our history in South Sudan had not been real positive with what had happened in New Lang and Old Fengan. But I went with him, and I'm trying to remember that guy's name, Peter something. And we went to a place, we landed in a place called Maridi. And in 1997, all of South Sudan was a no-go zone. You were not allowed to go there, and the government of Sudan was very open in saying they would shoot down all aircraft. So, you know, we flew in about 200 feet above the tree level, and we landed in Maridi. We got out, and the plane took off, and we're on our own. And we want to get to this place called Katobi. And so we found some soldiers in a truck, and they helped us, and we got to Katobi, and we stayed in the church compound. And we heard of this place called Louis, which was about 25 miles to the east. By the way, Sudan miles are very long. And they're longer than miles here. And so I got the SPLA soldiers to take me to Louis. And Louis had just been liberated from 17 years of control by the Islamic government. There was church there. And one thing that really touched me, there was a tombstone there of a guy by the name of Dr. Kenneth Frazier, who had founded the Louis Hospital, and he was buried there in 1925. And he came there, he was from Scotland, I think, and he came there, was there for several years. He got sick and he died, but his wife went out, raised money, and came back and built the hospital. And he was buried there, and I just thought, wow, what a testimony, you know. And there's these faithful Christians there, the leaders in the church, very humble guys. And so on the wall of my office is a picture, or a framed contract between Samaritans Purse, the Church of Louis, something called the SRA, Sudan Relief Relief Rehabilitation Agency, and another group, I don't remember their name. And essentially what it said was that each one of the partners are going to do something in this deal. And what Samaritan's Purse's something is, we will get 2 wards set up, one for men, one for women. Each ward will hold 30 people, and we'll do it for 90 days. That's what I committed to in writing. And Mike Van Royen was there with me on the second trip when I negotiated this thing. We were there 10 years. And it turned into a 300-bed medical facility. I thought I saw 200 in here, but that wasn't. It was a 300-bed facility, and because we had a 100-bed, and you were up there, you came to Louis, and your son-in-law and daughter were up there. That's when Edward Densham came working for us. And that hospital became the premier healthcare facility in South Sudan. People walked more than 30 days to come and get medical attention. We saw amazing things done there. We saw absolutely incredible medical things. I don't even have the words to describe it, but I'm pretty good about, yeah, that's incredible. I can say that. And that's where this other young guy named Warren Cooper came up on our radar screen. Warren had not been out of his residency very long, and he came to South Sudan as general surgeon. And, of course, now, in all honesty, in Mundry County, where Louis is, I would bet there are 3,000 to 5,000 people named Cooper. Koopa. And so to let you know the impact that this had, 2 years ago, up at the border between Sudan and South Sudan, I went up there and met a military general and like a governor. And we fly there. It's very surreal. There's one tree like in 10 miles, and they have a plastic table set up under that tree for us to come and sit down with them. So we walk like the half mile from the plane over, and we sit down there. And I introduced myself and said I was with Samaritan's Purse. And this governor looks at me and he says, "Do you know Warren Cooper?" And I said, "Yeah, I know Warren. He works for me." He pulls his shirt up and he shows me this. He had some kind of intestinal blockage, and Coop had fixed him. And so, you know, we were friends. But Louis Hospital also gave us tremendous trust with people throughout South Sudan, including the people who are the leaders of South Sudan now. And when it was bombed in 2000, Franklin called Senator Jesse Helms and said, "Can you do something to help stop the bombing?" So he called Madeleine Albright. Madeleine Albright called the foreign minister of Sudan. Ishmael was his name. And that's how Samaritan's Purse got on the radar screen of the Khartoum government, through that. And so the foreign minister and the chargé d'affaires, the highest diplomat they had in the United States, came to visit Franklin in 2001. I've got to tell you this story. And said, "Listen, you know, there's a lot of Christian kids up there. You can come up there and help up in the north, too." And so Franklin sent Gary Lundstrom and I think Hans Manegren over to see about doing Operation Christmas Child. And we were getting ready to do the whole program. It was 12 years ago today. Franklin and I were watching the towers fall, and Franklin turned around and said, "You know, I don't think we'll go to Khartoum this year." And we didn't until 2003. But God gave us favor. We went there in 2003. We met Bashir, and again in 2007, and again in 2009. And it came out of this work. So this is just one photograph of Louis Hospital, 1998, Hurricane Mitch. Now we're starting to develop capacity. We're developing management structure, and we're starting to think we want to do more disasters. Hurricane Mitch, a lot of rain. It says on here 6,000 people died. I have a higher number in my memory, but that's beyond the point. So we started, general humanitarian response with shelter, non-food items, mobilizing volunteers, mobilizing churches. And what we found out after about 2 weeks there was that all of the infrastructure in the country was destroyed. People couldn't get around on the roads, and people were locked off. They were blocked off all over the country. And so we placed a helicopter down there, and we started doing mobile medical brigades to reach these people. And we kept that operation with the helicopter going for 8 or 9 months. And you can see some photographs here of the type of damage and just some general things, handing out relief supplies. 1999, Kosovo. We've always been good about learning the lessons where we are and moving them right into the next project, which makes us very responsive, but it doesn't always make us have the best institutional memory we just sort of grow as we go. So we learned things in Honduras. Kosovo happens. Remember I mentioned Yugoslavia a minute ago breaking up. This was a part of it. It wasn't over yet. And the United States President Clinton took a firm stand on Kosovo. And then the American public generously came to bat and gave money. And, we went to Kosovo. But sometimes the plans don't work out like you think. First we went to Macedonia, and we couldn't do anything in Macedonia because the government was so tight and restrictive. And we went, I drove from Macedonia all the way over to Albania and went into Albania, and that's I could talk for hours about Albania. It's a little weird place. But we worked with UNHCR. It says UNHCK, but it's UNHCR. And we found this little village called Hamala that had a big flat piece of land where we could build a refugee camp. There were about 800,000 refugees who come into Albania, and nobody knew what they were going to do with them. It was a big issue. So Paul Childs and I were over there. We worked with UNHCR. Then we called in for more people, and we eventually sent a lot of people over there, including Terry Harmon, who came over, and that's where I met Matt Ellingson for the first time. You knew Paul Childs, and Paul called you, and your dad came over. And there may have been anybody else in this room over there? You were over there.
Yeah.
Oh, you came over with a hospital.
Yep.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to set up a hospital. This refugee camp was going to hold like 25 or 27,000 people. And we put up a hospital, and we got Johns Hopkins University, and Dr. Mike Van Rooyen came over and sort of guided us and spoke into what that hospital was going to be like. So we built this entire city. About 5,000 people came, and then there was a ceasefire, and they just started leaving, like 400 or 500 people a day. And so we did something that I learned later was a no-no. We had a funding agreement with UNHCR in Albania, and we packed up everything in the camp, 19 tractor and trailer loads, and we took it to Kosovo. And UNHCR was twisted over the whole issue. It took me 2 years to get a deal. And but we did the right thing. We didn't do anything wrong. We had full accountability. We just didn't have permission.
Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Ask for forgiveness, not permission. Page. Okay, Mozambique in the year 2000. It was heavy flooding, and it's most memorable because the BBC captured a picture of a woman having a baby in a tree. Any of you remember that? And about 800 people died, but this is massive area, an area where it's totally undeveloped. People are subsistence farmers, and life is hard. So we had an emergency response down there, and we focused on rebuilding a medical center in a place called Caniçado. And we were starting to sort of form ourselves up into a bit more structure, but we still hadn't specified roles as we do today with Emmett and Dart. And one of the things that's notable about that is young Matt Ellingson engaged with UNICEF, and you built our first cholera treatment center there. Little did you know that as the country director in Haiti in 2010, you would be besieged by a cholera epidemic. Good experience. Indonesia tsunami 2004. Some things that we learned there, we didn't have that much of a significant medical response, but we learned coordination with the U.S. government. We learned how to do things in a larger way, working in multiple countries simultaneously. We were in Indonesia, we were in Sri Lanka, we were doing things in India all at the same time. So we were really exercising our capacity, but then again, you had an environment that was conducive to Christians and Americans being there, and you don't always have that environment. And then when President Bush asked for the American people to give generously to help, that resources, and so we moved our helicopter that had been in Honduras. We moved it over there. And I think we probably had 50 or 60 people over there and ended up building back thousands of houses and schools and a lot of different things. Page. I wasn't here actually during the tsunami. I had gone to work for the U.S. government, and in that role, I coordinated the U.S. government's response to the tsunami, which was very interesting from my own personal perspective and the things that I got to learn. Keep going, Haiti 2010. So when I came back from the U.S. government, we built, and this is going to be a little out of context with these slides, the incident management team structure and the disaster assistance response team structure. And we actually, for the first time, structured and trained our staff in what to do in an emergency and how we would manage it. And that's the room that we're sitting in. This is the operations center. We created a training unit. We created a security unit. We created a health clearance process. We looked at a lot of these different kind of issues. So when Haiti happened, in the earthquake of 2010, we were much better prepared to move people, to mobilize people, and to move stuff on the ground. And Haiti, 230,000 people were killed. There were hundreds of thousands injured, and we had people on the ground probably in about 18 hours after the earthquake. But the IMIT was stood up within 2 hours of the earthquake. We were here getting things together, and I'm feel certain probably some of you in here were involved in that Haiti response. I know you were. Matt was. Terry had to have done something.
He was on the IMIT.
Terry was on the IMIT, and it was all hands mustered, and the entire organization, like a magnifying glass, was focused on Haiti. And that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing, but you got to deal with whatever's coming down on you once that machinery starts working. But we did probably send 300 docs down over a period of months. One of you familiar with these details? And did you go down there, Dick?
No, I was in Africa. I think it was,
you were in
Africa. It was on. It may have been 800 different doctors.
You're talking about the cholera time.
During the cholera time, yeah.
Yeah.
It may have been some repeat doctors.
So immediately post-earthquake, we were doing a lot of surgical things in partnership with the Baptist Haiti Mission, and we were rotating docs through. That's where Lance was, and they had 2 clean ORs, which was something at a premium in all of Haiti. There weren't any clean ORs. So I think they would send us the closed or the open fractures.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sort of put our machinery into place, and we're supporting them. And then 10 months later, cholera broke out, and that's when, as Matt was saying, we had, he said 800 doctors. We had hundreds of thousands, actually, not hundreds of thousands. We had thousands of volunteers that came down on that program. And that is probably the largest single emergency response I've ever known Samaritan's Purse to have. Here's a photograph of a picture in Haiti, and this one looks like the cholera clinic in Haiti, the next photograph. So what are the common factors? I actually wrote more on this and didn't come through. The common factors in a disaster that require medical response is, that's always sort of changing. But certainly the existing healthcare capacity is overwhelmed. The healthcare capacity, the infrastructure is destroyed. The national infrastructure can impede access to health care. The entire logistics supply line in a country can be destroyed. That is what had happened to Haiti. So, we had to give consideration not to just getting people on the ground, but you had to send everything that they were going to need to work. And you have to take into consideration, electricity, water was out, health and sanitation. So you've got all of these issues that happen in this kind of a disaster. I mentioned a little bit about the DART team and the IMIT team, although it's not on here. And but this has given us a mechanism to respond in a coordinated fashion. And I oftentimes describe the DART as a pickup truck. We've got the truck built. We can get in it. We can drive where we want to go. And as we look to the future, we're giving more thought about what are the modules that we will put in the back of the truck to take to the emergency. And the one that we're working on now is medical emergency. And it's actually not too difficult to engineer on the front end of what's all the stuff you need to take with the DART out to the field to have a field hospital or a medical response. But the more relevant question is, what type of disasters in the world would allow you to bring a medical team? And so as we go forward and look at that, I'm helping, it's helping me to understand by looking backwards. Where could we have deployed a hospital? Where could we have had a larger, more invigorated medical response? And what are some of those factors? You know, a quick example, during Hurricane Katrina, clearly the healthcare capacity down in New Orleans and Louisiana was overwhelmed. But in the United States, you can't just go practice medicine somewhere. You've got to have a license. But Louisiana's governor did write a waiver and allowed medical practitioners from other states to come in. But that is an exception. That's not something that you see normally. So what would a disaster look like in the United States for us to have to be able to deploy a medical response? That's one question. But what about overseas? What about in a Sudan or in a Mozambique or in a Liberia or in a Cambodia? It has to be an overwhelming calamity that has not only destroyed the infrastructure, impeded the infrastructure, but you also have to have the governmental permission to allow it to come in. And these are challenges that we face as we think about having a medical response. We don't want to create a parallel healthcare system, and we don't want to create a healthcare system of a level that's higher than the one that they have there, because it can't be sustained. So our time is up, and if there's any questions.
Any questions at all? Kenny, in Sudan and Somalia, there was no health care there, so you're automatically higher than what's there.
And you're free to come in, too.
Right. And there was no government there?
Yeah. There's not much of one in Sudan, South Sudan now, and Somalia doesn't have much of one either.
And in Japan, they didn't request medical, did they?
No, and in Japan, it's very much like the United States. The more a country is developed, the harder it is to have an emergency response in, because they have, their national mechanisms. They have their militaries. We have FEMA, and all of this.
Yeah.
But Japan wouldn't even let us bring water filters in. And you know why? Because they have their own hygiene standards. And we had to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I went personally and got them to waiver for us to even bring soap and toothpaste in. And that sounds really weird, except you would have to do the same thing in the United States.
Oh, yeah.